Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are really getting into something critical for climate strategy. We're looking at negative emission technologies.
Right, and NETPs, basically the methods we need to actively pull CO2 out of the atmosphere.
Exactly. But it's not just about whether we can do it. It's about public acceptability.
Uh,
Will people actually get behind these things?
that's the core issue, and our analysis today comes from a really big survey done in 2025.
Yeah, over 5,300 people across 6 European countries. Germany, Spain, Finland, who else?
Lithuania, the Netherlands, and Poland. So a pretty broad cross-section of Europe.
And the study focuses on two key, very different NETPs.
That's right. First, you've got afforestation and reforestation, or AR. Pretty straightforward, planting trees, boosting natural carbon sinks. It's the nature-based approach.
The green one, you might say?
Kind of, yeah. And then the other one is direct air capture with carbon storage DACCS. That's the high-tech engineered solution.
Using chemicals to literally filter CO2 from the air.
Right, and then storing that captured CO2, usually liquefied, deep underground.
Okay, so nature versus machine, basically. And the immediate hook here is that, well, the public gets that we need these things, but boy, do they have preferences.
Oh, absolutely. Clear preferences.
Right.
And interestingly, those preferences aren't always driven by, say, technical efficiency. It seems to be more about gut feelings, maybe moral framing.
Okay, so let's start with the big picture. Where do these NTPs fit in the grand scheme of climate actions, according to the public?
Well, the experts, like the IPCC, they're clear. NETPs are supplementary. We need deep emissions cuts first and foremost. But the survey asked people to sort of rank their priorities.
How do they do that?
They gave participants 4 main options for mitigation and asked them to allocate like 100% of the effort across them.
And number one was, predictably, I guess.
Yeah, no surprises there. Renewable energy, solar, wind. That got the biggest share, an average of about 37.3%. Everyone agrees on that.
Right, makes sense. What came next?
This is where it gets interesting. Second place went to behavior change.
Ah, so things like flying less, eating less meat.
Exactly. That got an average of 24.0%. And this is important because, there's often skepticism about whether the public is really willing to accept lifestyle adjustments.
So this data suggests they actually prioritize it quite highly, more than some tech solutions.
That's what it looks like. They ranked behavior change above both nuclear energy and NETPs. It kind of pushes back against the idea that people only want technological fixes.
I wonder, though, is that 24% saying, yes, I will change my behavior, or more like, yes, changing behavior is generally a good idea for us? There's often a gap between stated preference and action.
That's a fair point, absolutely. Polling always has that limitation. But, at the level of principle, it does show support for a broader approach, one that includes demand-side measures. It suggests people aren't just waiting for a magic tech bullet.
Okay, so renewables top, behavior change second. What's at the bottom?
Then you have nuclear energy and NETPs. They came in pretty close, actually. Nuclear got about 20.2% on average, and NETPs got 18.5%.
So seen as necessary, maybe, but definitely the least preferred options overall.
Generally, yes. But there were some interesting variations between countries.
Oh, like what?
Well, for instance, in Spain and Lithuania, people actually preferred NETPs over nuclear energy, so they swapped those bottom 2 ranks.
Okay.
And Poland was a real outlier. It was the only country where nuclear energy was ranked higher than behavior change.
Huh. Interesting regional differences then. But the overall picture seems to be people want the clean energy transition first.
Definitely. Clean energy first, then a serious look at changing how we live and consume.
And then reluctantly almost bringing in the heavy engineering like NETPs or nuclear power as necessary backup.
That seems to be the takeaway. The public view aligns pretty well with the IPCC's all options needed perspective, but with very clear priorities.
Which sets us up perfectly to compare the two NETPs themselves. The nature one versus the machine one.
Exactly. Afforestation versus direct air capture, AR versus DDCS.
And based on what we've heard so far, I'm guessing the nature-based one comes out on top?
Oh, massively. It's not even close. The central finding is AR is substantially more acceptable than DACCS.
How much more acceptable? Can we put a number on that?
Yeah, the study calculated the odds ratio. Overall, people were 4.36 times more likely to accept AR compared to DCCS.
Wow, over 4 times. That's a huge gap.
It is. Think of it like this. AR is like restoring a familiar park, maybe. A DACCS is like building a large, complex industrial facility. The gut reaction is just very different.
And did that gap vary by country, too?
It did, quite a bit. The preference for AR was strongest in the Netherlands, almost 7 times higher acceptance, 6.88.
Okay.
It was lowest in Spain, but still significant, 2.80 times higher for AR.
So even where the gap was smallest, trees were still almost 3 times more popular. What drives that huge difference? Is it just natural good, unnatural bad?
That's part of it, but the study suggests it's a bit more nuanced. Crucially, opinions on DACCS weren't strongly negative. They were more neutral.
So not outright rejection, just ambivalence, or maybe apprehension.
Exactly, which means there's potentially room to increase its acceptability if concerns are addressed. It's not like people hate the idea, they just don't love it like they love trees.
Right. So the researchers dug into why people felt this way, beyond just natural versus unnatural.
Yes, they looked at 4 specific perceived consequences. Things related to the environment, future generations, effectiveness, and how these technologies might interact with other climate efforts.
Okay, let's break those down. How did AR and DACCS compare on these factors?
Well, AR basically won across the board. It got significantly more positive ratings on all 4 dimensions.
Okay, factor 1, impacts on nature and the environment. Predictable win for trees.
Totally. AR was rated very positively, average score 1.79 on their scale, seen as restoring nature. DACCS, on the other hand, scored much lower, 0.59. People likely associate it with chemical processes, industrial sites, maybe potential environmental disruption from storage.
Right, makes intuitive sense. What about factor 2, consequences for future generations?
Similar story. AR scored 1.68, seen as leaving a positive legacy, a healthier environment. DACCS only got 0.48.
Why so low for DACCS there? What's the concern for the future?
The big worry seems to be about the long-term storage of the CO2. The risk that it might leak back out eventually from those underground reservoirs. That's a burden people worry about leaving for future generations.
So AR feels safe and restorative both now and for the future. DACCS feels riskier, more uncertain.
That's definitely the perception reflected in the data. It taps into a sense of ecological and intergenerational responsibility.
Which leads us to the third factor, and you flagged this as a big surprise, effectiveness in limiting global warming.
Yeah, this one is fascinating. Get this. The public perceived AR as more effective at limiting global warming than DACCS.
Wait, hang on. Didn't the study materials or just general knowledge suggest DACCS has a much higher potential removal capacity, technically?
Exactly. The information provided even noted DACCS could potentially remove 5 to 40 gigatons of CO2 equivalent per year, whereas AR is more like 0.5 to 10 gigatons.
So the tech solution can theoretically do way more, maybe 4 times as much at the top end? But people think trees are more effective.
That's what they found. AR scored 1.30 on perceived effectiveness. DACCS only 0.57.
How do you explain that? Is it just that people don't trust the technology? Or don't believe the numbers?
It could be a mix of things. Maybe distrust, maybe a lack of understanding of the scale. But I think it strongly suggests that for the public, effectiveness isn't just about the raw numbers, the gigatons.
It's about what? Something else.
It seems tied to that intuitive feeling again. Planting trees feels like a direct, understandable, positive action. Building large chemical plants feels complex, maybe even a bit abstract, and perhaps less trustworthy in its promises. The perceived naturalness seems to translate into perceived effectiveness, even against the technical data.
That's a huge challenge for communicating technological climate solutions, then.
A massive one. Okay, the fourth factor was about support for other mitigation efforts.
The mitigation deterrence idea. Does using these technologies make us lazy about cutting emissions? Does it give polluters an excuse?
Right. And again, AR came out better. It scored 1.36, suggesting people felt it was more supportive of, or at least less likely to undermine, other efforts like renewables or efficiency.
And DACCS?
Scored lower, 0.55. There seems to be more suspicion that DACS could be used as a sort of get-out-of-jail-free card by industries wanting to continue fossil fuel use.
Okay, so if we tie these 4 factors back to overall acceptability, for AR, the tree planting one, what was the main driver?
It was really clear for AR, the perceived impact on nature and the environment was the single biggest predictor. It really is all about that positive natural image.
It's simple enough. But for DACCS, the high-tech option.
It was more complicated. No single factor dominated. Instead, all 4 perceptions, nature impacts, future generations, effectiveness, and mitigation support were all moderately linked to acceptability.
So to gain public acceptance for DCCS, you can't just focus on one thing, like proving it's effective.
Apparently not. You need to address the whole package of concerns. People need to be convinced it's reasonably good for nature, safe for the future, genuinely effective in a way they trust, and won't hinder other climate actions. It's a much harder sell.
A much more complex picture for DTCCS acceptance. Okay, this brings us to the final, really interesting finding. The NMBY effect. Not in my backyard.
Yeah, the classic idea. People support something in general, but not when it's going to be built near them.
Yeah.
This study looked at it on a national level.
So acceptance in general versus acceptance of deployment in your own country?
Exactly. And for AR, for afforestation, the traditional NMB pattern actually showed up.
Really? People like trees generally, but not necessarily more trees in their own country.
Sort of, yeah. Acceptance was higher for AR in general, score 1.91, than for AR in my country, score 1.44.
Why would that be? Competition for land.
That's the likely reason, especially in densely populated countries or places that value agricultural land highly. People might worry about large-scale tree planting, taking up space needed for food, housing, or other uses.
Or maybe, like in Finland, which they mentioned, if you already have a lot of forests, the appetite for more might be lower.
That could play a role, too. Resource competition seems key for AR's national NIMBY effect.
Okay, so AR fits the NIMBY pattern. Now what about the high-tech DACCS? Surely people would be less keen on having those industrial plants in their own country.
That's what you'd intuitively expect, right? But the study found the opposite.
Wait, opposite. No NIMBY effect for DACCS.
Even stronger than that, the conventional NIMBY wisdom was not supported for DCS. In fact, overall, DCCS was rated slightly more acceptable for deployment in my country, score 0.76, than in general, score 0.64.
Get out. People were more okay with having DACCS built domestically.
Yeah. Specifically in Germany, Spain, and the Netherlands, people found implementing DACCS nationally significantly more acceptable than just the general idea of DCCS.
That completely turns the usual thinking on its head. Why? Why would you want the potentially risky tech closer to home?
Well, the study doesn't definitively say why, but we can speculate. Think about what a large DACS project brings.
Okay. Jobs, investment, technological leadership.
Exactly. High-skilled jobs, industrial development, maybe a sense of national pride or self-sufficiency in tackling climate change. For a big tech-heavy solution like DACCS, those potential national benefits might actually outweigh the generalized abstract risks in people's minds.
So the benefits become more tangible when it's our project, whereas the risks might feel more abstract anyway.
Possibly. It suggests that for certain kinds of infrastructure, especially cutting-edge tech, the national context and potential local gains can actually boost acceptance rather than hinder it. It really challenges the simplistic view of NIMBYism.
So policymakers shouldn't just assume automatic national resistance to deploying DACCS.
Definitely not. The picture is much more nuanced. Only Finland showed the classic NMBY pattern for DACCS, aligning with their AR views, perhaps. Everywhere else, national deployment wasn't seen as worse, and in several key countries, it was seen as better.
Fascinating. Okay, let's try and bring this all home then. What's the big message for you listening, trying to make sense of climate strategy?
Well, I think the public mandate is pretty clear from this. Prioritize renewables, absolutely. Take behavior change seriously as a core part of the strategy.
Right.
And yes, accept that NETPs are part of the necessary toolkit, but understand the strong preference for nature-based solutions like AR. That preference is driven by deep-seated feelings about safety, nature, and legacy.
And for policymakers trying to actually implement this stuff.
Yeah.
Especially DACCS.
The key is, don't just focus on the cost per ton or the technical potential. You have to address those broader concerns, the environmental impacts, the intergenerational risks, the perceived effectiveness, the mitigation deterrence fears. You need to build trust across all those dimensions.
It's about the whole narrative, not just the engineering specs.
Precisely. Which leads us to maybe a final provocative thought to leave people with.
Okay, let's hear it.
If public acceptance and even perceived effectiveness hinges so much on these intuitive, almost moral judgments like favoring AR, even though DACCS might be technically more powerful, what does that mean for how we talk about climate tech?
Are we focusing too much on the science and engineering details?
Maybe. Should the focus shift more towards building narratives around safety, alignment with nature, ethical responsibility, and long-term legacy? If intuition trumps technical data in the public mind, how do we adjust our communication strategies fundamentally?
A really crucial question. As these technologies become more central to the climate debate, we need the tech, but we need the public on board.
Exactly. It's about finding that intersection.
Well, that's a lot to think about. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.